Step away from the gate. You don't have authorization to be here." The words landed across JFK Airport's executive terminal like a sudden silence breaking through the morning rush. Richard Hayes, the head of airport security operations, stood behind the checkpoint with a confident expression, looking directly at the woman in front of him as if he had already decided who she was before hearing her name. Amelia Carter did not move. She simply stood there, calm and composed, holding a slim black folder in one hand and a coffee cup in the other. Around her, travelers moved through the terminal carrying suitcases, checking flight boards, and rushing toward their gates, unaware that a moment was unfolding that would later appear across national headlines. Amelia wore a simple black blazer, dark jeans, and comfortable shoes. No luxury handbag. No assistant walking beside her. No group of executives announcing her arrival. She looked like any other traveler passing through one of the busiest airports in America. And that was exactly the point. Richard glanced at her documents, then looked back at her face. "Ma'am, this section is restricted," he said. "Only authorized personnel and executive guests are allowed beyond this point." Amelia calmly handed him the access confirmation. "You may want to check the name again," she replied. Tables where people underestimated her before they ever heard her ideas. But today, she was not there to prove anything. She was there to observe. Because just days earlier, her company had completed a historic acquisition connected to JFK Airport's future operations. Amelia wanted to understand the environment from the perspective of someone nobody recognized. She wanted to know what happened when a person walked in without a title, without a reputation, without anyone announcing their importance. Richard folded his arms. "I'm going to need you to wait over there while we verify everything." His voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Amelia looked around the terminal. The cameras above the ceiling were recording. The employees nearby were watching. The passengers were beginning to notice. She took a slow breath and remained completely calm. She had learned long ago that some people mistook silence for weakness. They believed a quiet person had no power. But Amelia Carter knew something they didn't. Sometimes the person standing quietly in the room is the one who knows exactly how the story ends. And as Richard continued to question the woman he believed he was stopping, he had no idea that the person standing in front of him was about to become the most important name connected to JFK Airport's future. Amelia Carter had spent decades learning one important lesson. People often reveal the most about themselves when they believe nobody important is watching. As Richard Hayes continued standing across from her at the JFK security checkpoint, she noticed every small detail. The way his tone changed when he spoke to her. The way he looked past her credentials and focused instead on what he thought she represented. The way several employees nearby stayed silent, unsure whether to question him or simply follow along. Amelia had seen this pattern before. Not always in the same place. Not always with the same words. But always with the same assumption. Years earlier, before Carter Global Holdings became a name recognized across the transportation industry, Amelia had walked into a corporate meeting wearing a simple suit and carrying a folder full of ideas. A senior executive had looked at her resume, then looked at her again, surprised that someone like her was leading the proposal. He never said the words directly, but the message was clear. He did not expect her to be the person in charge. That moment stayed with her, not because it stopped her, but because it reminded her how often people confuse appearance with ability. Now, standing inside one of the busiest airports in the world, she saw the same mistake happening again. Richard picked up his radio and spoke quietly to another security employee. Amelia watched as the situation grew larger, not because she raised her voice, but because someone else had decided her presence required an explanation. A few feet away, Maya Brooks, a young airport employee working at the information desk, noticed the interaction. She had seen thousands of travelers pass through JFK. She knew the difference between someone who was lost and someone who belonged exactly where they were standing. Something about Richard's approach felt wrong. "Excuse me," Maya said carefully, stepping closer. "Maybe we should verify the access information before asking her to move." Richard turned toward her. "Maya, I have this handled." His response was polite on the surface, but the message underneath was clear. "Stay out of it." Maya looked back at Amelia, then at the documents in Richard's hand. She knew technology did not care about assumptions. Systems did not judge clothing or first impressions. They showed facts. Amelia remained patient. She did not interrupt. She did not demand special treatment. She simply waited. That patience confused Richard more than anger would have. He expected frustration. He expected an argument. He expected someone trying to prove themselves. Instead, he saw a woman who seemed completely certain that the truth would eventually speak for itself. "You understand this area is not open to everyone," Richard said. Amelia looked directly at him. "I understand," she replied. "That is why I asked you to verify." Her words were calm, but they carried weight. The terminal seemed to slow around them. The sounds of rolling luggage, boarding announcements, and conversations blended into the background. For a moment, it felt like the entire airport was waiting. Maya returned to her computer and began checking the information connected to Amelia's access request. Her eyes moved across the screen, then stopped. She looked again, making sure she had read it correctly. The name on the system was not just familiar. It was impossible to ignore. Amelia Carter. Executive Transition Authorization. JFK Operations Review. Ownership documentation confirmed. Maya slowly looked up from the screen. She realized the person standing in front of her was not someone trying to enter a restricted area. She was someone who had every reason to be there. And Richard Hayes was about to discover that the woman he thought he was stopping was the very person his entire organization was preparing to welcome. Richard Hayes stared at the screen in front of Maya Brooks with a growing sense of uncertainty. He had expected a mistake. He had expected a misunderstanding that could be corrected with a simple explanation. But what appeared on that monitor was something completely different. Maya slowly turned away from the computer, her expression changing from curiosity to concern. The information was clear. Amelia Carter was not requesting access. She already had authorization. She was not an unknown visitor. She was connected to the highest level of the airport transition process. But Richard did not step back. Instead, he looked at Maya and shook his head. "You might want to double-check that," he said. "Systems can have errors." Maya looked back at the screen. She knew what she saw. The system was not confused. The facts were not unclear. But before she could explain, Richard moved closer and lowered his voice. "This is a security matter. We cannot just let anyone walk into executive areas because a computer shows a name." Amelia watched the exchange quietly. She noticed something important. The problem was no longer about verification. It was about someone refusing to accept information that challenged their first impression. The terminal around them became more aware of what was happening. A few travelers had stopped pretending not to watch. A woman near the boarding area looked over while holding her coffee. A businessman waiting near the charging station glanced between Richard and Amelia, sensing that something unusual was happening. Richard straightened his uniform and called another security employee over. "We need additional verification," he said. The words sounded professional, but the meaning was becoming obvious. Amelia was not being treated like someone whose information needed confirmation. She was being treated like someone who needed to prove she belonged. Maya looked uncomfortable. She had worked at JFK long enough to understand procedures. She also understood when procedures were being used differently, depending on who was standing in front of someone. "Mr. Hayes," Maya said carefully, "the authorization is already confirmed. The system shows executive clearance." Richard looked at her. "Maya, you are new to these situations. Sometimes people know how to make things look official." That sentence stayed in the air. Amelia heard it. Maya heard it. So did several people nearby. Amelia lowered her eyes for a moment, remembering another day years earlier. She had been in a conference room in Chicago, presenting a transportation proposal that could have changed an entire company's future. Before she even finished introducing herself, someone asked if she was there to take notes. She remembered that feeling. Not anger, not surprise, just the quiet realization that some people decide your place before they know your story. But she also remembered what happened next. She built anyway. She achieved anyway. She became the person those same rooms eventually had to listen to. Back at JFK, Amelia looked at Richard and remained composed. "You have the information you need," she said. "The question is whether you are willing to accept it." Richard did not answer immediately. Instead, he focused on the crowd forming around the checkpoint. He wanted control of the situation. He wanted the room to believe he was protecting something important. But the more he tried to explain, the more people noticed the difference between security and suspicion. Maya quietly stepped away and opened the internal records. Connected to the transition process, she needed to confirm one final detail. Her eyes moved across the page. Then she saw it. The document was not just a routine executive file. It was the official ownership transition record. The person standing beside the security checkpoint was listed as the new owner representative of JFK Airport operations. Maya looked up slowly. She understood the truth now. Richard was not stopping a stranger. He was stopping the future of the place he worked. And Amelia Carter was still standing there, calm and patient, allowing every decision, every word, and every assumption to reveal exactly what she needed to know. The screen in front of Maya Brooks had changed everything, but Richard Hayes still refused to see it. The airport terminal continued moving around them, passengers pulling luggage across polished floors, announcements echoing through the massive space, and flights appearing on digital boards above their heads. Yet at that checkpoint, time felt different. Everyone watching could feel that something important was unfolding. Maya looked at Amelia Carter with a mixture of surprise and respect. She had heard the name before. Almost everyone in the transportation industry had. But seeing the person behind the headlines standing quietly in front of her was different. Amelia did not carry herself like someone demanding recognition. She carried herself like someone who had already earned it. Richard noticed the attention growing around him and adjusted his posture. "This is a misunderstanding," he said firmly. "We are simply following procedure." Amelia looked at him calmly. "Procedure is important," she replied. "But so is judgment." Her words were simple, but they carried through the space. Richard turned back toward Maya. "Show me the authorization details." Maya opened the record again and carefully reviewed the information. "The access request is connected to the JFK Transition Review," she explained. "The credentials are confirmed." Richard remained silent for a moment. Then he looked at Amelia. "Why did you not say who you were?" It was the question everyone around them was thinking. Amelia took a moment before answering. "Because I wanted to see how people are treated when they believe nobody important is watching." The sentence changed the atmosphere. The nearby passengers became quieter. A man standing near the security line lowered his phone slightly, listening more closely. A woman sitting near the gate looked over with a thoughtful expression. They were no longer watching a simple security check. They were watching a lesson unfold in real time. Amelia had not arrived at JFK looking for conflict. She had arrived looking for answers. After the acquisition process began, she reviewed reports, numbers, and operational data. Everything looked impressive on paper. Efficiency was high. Customer satisfaction reports were positive. But Amelia knew something numbers could not always reveal. She knew that the experience of ordinary people often existed between the lines of official reports. That was why she chose to arrive without a visible executive presence. No public announcement. No group of representatives. No introduction before she entered the terminal. She wanted the truth without preparation. Richard looked uncomfortable, but tried to maintain his authority. "You understand that security cannot simply trust everyone who claims to have access." Amelia nodded. "You are right. Verification matters." She paused and looked around the checkpoint. But assumptions can be dangerous when they happen before verification. Maya quietly stepped forward. "Mr. Hayes, there is one more thing." Richard turned toward her. Maya looked at the record on her screen. "The transition file includes a scheduled executive review today." She hesitated before continuing. "With Ms. Carter." The words settled over the checkpoint. Richard's expression changed slightly. He finally understood that the situation was not what he believed it was. But the moment had already been recorded. Every decision, every assumption, every word. Amelia noticed Maya's courage. She saw a young employee choosing honesty even when it was uncomfortable. That mattered, because real change rarely begins with the person holding the most power. Sometimes it begins with one person deciding to speak when silence would be easier. Amelia gave Maya a small nod of appreciation. Then she turned back toward Richard. She was not angry. She was not seeking revenge. She was simply waiting for the truth to finish arriving. And as the people around them watched, the story of that morning at JFK was becoming something much bigger than a security misunderstanding. It was becoming a moment that would reveal exactly how a system treated someone when it believed she had no power at all. The atmosphere around the checkpoint had changed completely. A few minutes earlier, Richard Hayes believed he was managing a simple security situation. Now, he was standing in the middle of a growing crowd, facing a reality he had never expected. Amelia Carter remained calm, but everyone around her could feel the difference. The power in the room had shifted, not because Amelia demanded attention, but because the facts had started speaking louder than assumptions. Richard looked at the access records again, searching for a reason to dismiss what he was seeing. He wanted the situation to return to something familiar. A traveler. A security concern. A routine decision. But nothing about this moment was routine anymore. There must be some kind of mistake, Richard said. Maya looked at him carefully. The system has confirmed the information 3 times. Her voice was respectful, but steady. The authorization is valid. Richard glanced around at the people watching. He noticed passengers holding their phones. He noticed employees quietly observing. He noticed that the confidence he had when Amelia first approached was no longer there. Yet instead of stepping back, he made the decision that would define the rest of the morning. Until everything is reviewed, she cannot proceed, he said. The words were professional, but the meaning was clear. He was still choosing control over understanding. Amelia looked at him for a long moment. She remembered another moment years ago when a business partner questioned whether she truly belonged in a leadership meeting. Back then, she had been younger, less experienced, and still building her reputation. She remembered sitting quietly while people discussed her company as if she was not in the room. But she also remembered what she did next. She listened. She learned. She built. She never forgot how quickly people could underestimate someone they did not understand. Back at JFK, she saw that same mistake happening again. Richard, Maya said softly. Perhaps we should complete the executive verification process. Richard turned toward her. I said I have it handled. Maya paused. She was no longer just an employee following instructions. She was a witness who understood what was happening. She looked at Amelia's documents and then back at Richard. The process exists to confirm facts, not to support assumptions. The sentence was quiet, but it carried weight. A few passengers exchanged looks. They understood the difference. Amelia had not asked anyone to treat her differently. She had only expected the same respect given to anyone whose information was being verified. Richard stepped closer to the desk and requested another review from the security system. The screen updated with additional details. The executive transition file. The ownership documentation. The scheduled review meeting. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Amelia Carter was exactly who the records said she was. But the most important part of the moment was no longer the information on the screen. It was everything that happened before the information appeared. The assumptions. The hesitation. The refusal to listen. Amelia looked toward the cameras above the terminal. She knew the entire interaction had been captured. She knew every word mattered. She knew that moments like this were not only about one person. They were about patterns that repeated when nobody questioned them. Richard finally looked at Amelia differently. Not with certainty. Not with confidence. But with the realization that he had misjudged the person standing in front of him. Amelia did not celebrate. She did not criticize him in front of everyone. She simply said, "The important question is not whether you knew who I was. The important question is how you treated me when you thought I was nobody." The terminal went quiet. Because everyone understood the truth behind those words. This was no longer about an access request. It was about a decision. And soon, the world would see exactly what that decision revealed. Amelia Carter reached into the pocket of her blazer and removed her phone with the same steady confidence she had carried since walking into the terminal. She did not hold it high for attention. She did not wave it in front of anyone. She simply unlocked the screen, selected a single contact, and placed the call. It connected before the second ring. "Good morning, Ms. Carter," a calm voice answered. "Everything is ready." Amelia looked across the checkpoint without taking her eyes off Richard Hayes. "Activate the executive transition review," she said. "I also want the operational audit to begin immediately." There was no emotion in her voice. No anger. No urgency. Just quiet certainty. "Understood," her executive assistant replied. "The review team has been standing by since your arrival. We have also synchronized the airport security logs, surveillance footage, and executive access records. Every interaction since you entered the terminal has been preserved." Amelia nodded once. "Thank you. Keep the process moving." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Richard watched the exchange with growing uncertainty. "Who exactly were you speaking with?" he asked. Amelia answered without hesitation. "The team responsible for today's transition review." Richard forced a polite smile. If this is really an executive visit, someone should have informed security. Amelia looked around the terminal before returning her attention to him. Perhaps they expected security to demonstrate its own standards without advance notice. The words settled heavily between them. Maya Brooks lowered her eyes for a moment. She understood exactly what Amelia meant. A prepared inspection measured compliance. An unannounced visit revealed culture. Around the checkpoint, more employees quietly gathered. Nobody interrupted. Nobody whispered. They simply watched. Several passengers who had planned to continue toward their gates remained nearby, sensing they were witnessing something that extended beyond one conversation. An elderly traveler, sitting near the window, folded his newspaper and quietly remarked to the woman beside him, "She has never raised her voice once." The woman nodded. "She has not needed to." Richard looked again at the executive authorization on Maya's monitor. Every attempt to challenge the documentation had ended with the same conclusion. The records were genuine. The clearance was authentic. The scheduled executive review existed. Yet the confidence he displayed only minutes earlier had disappeared. Amelia noticed every change in his expression. She had seen it before in boardrooms, investment meetings, and negotiations across the country. It was the moment when certainty gave way to doubt, not because new facts had appeared, but because old assumptions could no longer survive beside them. Her thoughts briefly returned to the earliest days of Carter Global Holdings. She remembered visiting construction sites where workers assumed she was part of the administrative staff instead of the company leading the project. She remembered introducing herself only after listening to every opinion already formed about her. Those experiences had taught her that character revealed itself most clearly before recognition arrived. That lesson had shaped the way she built every company she owned. "Ms. Carter," Maya said quietly, "the Executive Transition Office has just acknowledged your arrival." Amelia smiled warmly. "Thank you, Maya." Richard looked from Amelia to the screen and back again. "So this entire time," he stopped before finishing the sentence. Amelia completed it for him. "This entire time, I was exactly who the record said I was." Another notification appeared on Maya's monitor. The executive review had officially begun. Internal audit teams were logging access records, communication histories, and operational decisions connected to the morning's events. Amelia had not initiated the process to embarrass anyone. She had initiated it because organizations do not improve by ignoring uncomfortable moments. They improve when those moments are examined honestly. As another boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, the checkpoint no longer felt like the place where one traveler had been delayed. It had quietly become the starting point of an examination that would determine whether the values displayed on airport walls truly matched the actions practiced beneath them. The terminal speakers interrupted the steady rhythm of the morning with a familiar electronic tone. "Attention, passengers." Most people barely looked up. Announcements were part of airport life. But this one was different. Every television hanging above the concourse switched from travel updates to a live national news broadcast. The red banner across the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking news." Conversations slowed. Rolling suitcases stopped for a moment. Travelers waiting near the checkpoint turned toward the nearest monitor. The anchor appeared with a composed expression. "This morning marks the official completion of one of the largest private infrastructure acquisitions in recent aviation history. Carter Global Holdings has finalized its operational ownership transition agreement for JFK Airport, with Chief Executive Officer Amelia Carter beginning her first executive review today." The camera on the screen changed to a photograph of Amelia Carter standing beside transportation leaders during the signing ceremony several days earlier. The image was unmistakable. The woman standing quietly at the checkpoint was the same woman now appearing on every television throughout the terminal. The silence that followed seemed louder than the airport itself. Richard Hayes slowly turned toward the screen. Then he looked back at Amelia. Then back to the television again. The certainty that had guided every decision he made that morning disappeared completely. Around them, passengers recognized her almost instantly. The businessman near the charging station whispered, "That is her." The elderly traveler who had folded his newspaper moments earlier slowly stood. Even the airline employees passing through the concourse stopped to watch the broadcast continue. "Ms. Carter will oversee a comprehensive operational review focused on customer experience, leadership accountability, and organizational culture," the anchor continued. "The review begins immediately upon her arrival." Maya Brooks looked at Amelia with quiet admiration. The records had been correct. The authorization had been correct. Every opportunity to verify the truth had been there from the beginning. Richard spoke for the first time in several long seconds. Ms. Carter, his voice no longer carried the confidence it had earlier. Amelia met his eyes without changing her calm expression. Yes. Richard searched for words that refused to come easily. I was not aware. Amelia nodded gently. That is true. She paused before adding. But you were aware that I deserved to be treated with fairness before you knew my name. The sentence settled over everyone within hearing distance. Nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. The television continued showing footage from the acquisition ceremony, displaying Amelia shaking hands with transportation officials while reporters described the significance of the transition. Richard lowered his eyes briefly. He realized the reveal itself was not the hardest part. The hardest part was remembering every assumption he had made before the reveal happened. Amelia looked toward the television only once before returning her attention to the people around her. The news changes who you believe I am, she said quietly. It should not change how you believe people deserve to be treated. Maya felt those words more deeply than anyone realized. She understood that the lesson was larger than one airport, one employee, or one morning. It was about every moment when respect depended on recognition instead of humanity. More airport employees quietly gathered near the checkpoint after seeing the broadcast. Some recognized Amelia immediately. Others simply understood from the reactions around them that someone important had arrived. Amelia remained exactly where she had been standing from the beginning. She had not moved forward. She had not demanded access. She had simply allowed the truth to arrive in its own time. As the breaking news segment concluded and the televisions returned to regular programming, one reality remained impossible to ignore. The woman who had been asked to step aside only minutes earlier was not merely another traveler passing through the terminal. She was the leader entrusted with shaping its future, and every decision made before her identity became public had already become the first and most important finding of her executive review. The executive transition team arrived without ceremony. There were no flashing cameras, no dramatic entrance, and no raised voices. 5 professionals wearing simple identification badges walked through the terminal with folders and tablet computers in their hands. They greeted Amelia Carter with quiet respect before turning their attention to the checkpoint. The lead auditor spoke first. Ms. Carter, the review team is ready. Amelia nodded. Begin with the events from the moment I entered the terminal. I want the process to be thorough, objective, and fair. Richard Hayes stood silently as one of the auditors requested the security log, radio communications, and surveillance recordings. Another member of the team interviewed employees who had witnessed the interaction. Nobody was asked to choose sides. They were only asked to describe what they saw and what they heard. That difference mattered to Amelia. She had built her companies on one principle. Facts should never depend on status. Maya Brooks answered each question honestly. She explained how the authorization had appeared in the system, how it had been verified multiple times, and how she had encouraged additional confirmation instead of assumptions. When she finished, the auditor thanked her for remaining professional throughout the situation. Amelia noticed the relief on Maya's face. Doing the right thing was not always the easiest choice, especially for someone early in a career. A few minutes later, the lead auditor approached Amelia with a preliminary summary. The records confirmed that your executive authorization was valid before the first interaction. The delay occurred after verification, not before it. Amelia accepted the report without satisfaction or disappointment. She simply nodded. That distinction is important. Richard finally stepped forward. His confidence had been replaced by reflection. Ms. Carter, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. Amelia listened without interrupting. I believed I was protecting the airport, Richard continued. Instead, I allowed my first impression to influence my judgment. I should have trusted the verification process instead of my assumptions. The terminal remained unusually quiet as nearby passengers listened. Amelia answered with the same calm voice she had maintained all morning. An apology has value when it is followed by change. Richard lowered his head slightly. I understand. Amelia looked toward the employees gathered nearby. This review was never about one individual. It is about culture. If one person can be treated unfairly because of appearance, then the system has something to learn. Those words reached far beyond Richard. Supervisors standing nearby exchanged thoughtful looks. Employees who had remained silent earlier began considering what they would do differently if they witnessed a similar situation again. Amelia turned toward Maya. Thank you for respecting the facts, even when it was uncomfortable. Maya smiled modestly. I only followed the truth. Amelia returned the smile. That is exactly what leadership looks like. The lead auditor then outlined the next steps. Mandatory leadership training would be expanded. Customer interaction procedures would be reviewed. Executive audits would include anonymous observations instead of scheduled demonstrations. Amelia approved every recommendation. She wanted improvement, not embarrassment. Before leaving the checkpoint, she looked once more at Richard. Everyone deserves the opportunity to grow, she said. But growth begins when we are honest about the moments we wish had happened differently. Richard nodded slowly. I will remember this day for the rest of my career. Amelia believed him. As the executive team prepared to continue the scheduled review through the airport, the checkpoint returned to its normal rhythm. Travelers resumed their journeys. Boarding announcements echoed through the concourse. But the people who had witnessed the morning knew they had seen something more meaningful than a leadership transition. They had seen that real authority did not need to shout, real dignity did not depend on recognition, and real justice began the moment someone chose truth over assumption. As the executive review continued through the airport, Amelia Carter walked the concourse at the same steady pace she had maintained since entering the building that morning. Employees greeted her differently now. Some smiled with admiration. Others looked away, still reflecting on everything that had happened. But Amelia noticed something more meaningful than recognition. She noticed conversations changing. Supervisors paused to thank frontline employees. Managers stopped to ask questions instead of giving orders. Staff members began paying closer attention to travelers who had previously blended into the crowd. The lesson had already started spreading beyond the checkpoint. Later that afternoon, Amelia entered the main executive conference room overlooking the runways. Airliners taxied across the pavement while sunlight reflected against the terminal windows. Around the table sat senior leaders responsible for shaping the airport's future. Everyone expected the first meeting under new ownership to focus on financial forecasts, infrastructure projects, and expansion plans. Instead, Amelia placed a single photograph on the screen. It showed the security checkpoint exactly as it had looked that morning. She allowed the room to study the image before speaking. This, she said calmly, was the most important business meeting of my day. No one interrupted. Our technology worked. Our access system worked. Our operational procedures existed. But culture is revealed by the choices people make before certainty arrives. The room remained silent as executives considered her words. Amelia continued. People often ask how successful organizations stay successful. They expect the answer to involve innovation, investment, or strategy. Those things matter. But respect is also an investment. Fairness is also infrastructure. Trust is also an asset. Several executives quietly nodded. They understood that she was not describing a single incident. She was defining the standard that would guide every decision moving forward. By the end of the meeting, new leadership initiatives had been approved. Anonymous customer experience reviews would become a permanent part of airport operations. Managers would regularly spend time observing frontline interactions without announcing their visits. Employee evaluations would measure not only efficiency, but also dignity, fairness, and professional judgment. Amelia wanted every traveler to receive the same respect whether they wore an expensive suit, a maintenance uniform, casual clothes, or carried nothing more than a backpack. Weeks later, the changes were already visible. Customer feedback improved. Employees reported stronger teamwork. Supervisors spent more time listening before making decisions. Maya Brooks accepted a new leadership development opportunity after being recognized for her professionalism and integrity during the review. Richard Hayes remained with the organization after completing additional training and accepting responsibility for his actions. He often shared the story with new employees, not to defend himself, but to remind others how quickly assumptions can replace judgment if people are not careful. Amelia never spoke publicly about humiliating anyone involved that morning. When reporters asked about the airport transition, she simply said, "The strongest organizations are built by people who are willing to learn." That answer surprised many people because it focused on growth instead of blame. Yet those who understood her leadership style recognized that lasting justice was never about winning an argument. It was about creating a future where fewer people experienced the same injustice. Long after the news cameras had left and the headlines had faded, travelers continued walking through the same terminal without knowing the full story behind the changes they quietly experienced. They simply found employees who listened more carefully, verified before judging, and treated strangers with greater respect. And somewhere among the thousands of people moving through JFK each day, the greatest reminder remained invisible. The most powerful person in the building had entered without demanding recognition, had revealed the truth without raising her voice, and had proven that genuine leadership is measured not by how people treat those they admire, but by how they treat those they mistakenly believe have no power at all.